Welcome viewers. This video is going to be on doing the spark plugs and wires on a 2001 through 2007 Dodge Grand Caravan with the V6 engine. Now overall it's a fairly simple operation, great for beginners, with one caveat. You'll notice these three, it's 6 cylinders, so you get 3 spark plugs on this side here. But then the other 3 are tucked back under here where you can't see them and you can barely reach them. Now, I don't have a real big arm, so I can reach under there and get at them. I've done it a number of times in the past, and I don't know if it'll show up there, but there you go. It's I have the scars to prove it. It's not a pleasant job to do it that way. Other option, and if you look above, I will have a little box there linked to my other video for removing the whole windshield wiper, what's called a yoke, whatever, this whole assembly, getting that out of your way, and that'll give you clearance to access the spark plugs in the back. Now, it's basically choose your poison. Do you want to add scars? And you want to have a kind of a frustrating time of it, or do you want to put in the work of taking all of this apart? Me, I always opt for taking this apart. And which brings us to the next thing is your choice of spark plugs. You're going to want spark plugs that will last you 100,000 miles. That way you don't have to scar yourself up or take this apart again in order to change those spark plugs, 40,000 miles from now. And I will review with you what type of spark plugs I like to use. Now, what I like to use is the OEM choice of plug, which is the Champion 7440. Also goes by the number RE14PLP5, but 7440 is usually what you'll find it under. Though this spark plug is becoming increasingly difficult to get. The other one I like, which is a good substitute, is the Autolite Double Platinum. I don't know if I mentioned, this is the Champion Double Platinum spark plug. And this one should last you 100,000 miles. The ones that are in the van right now have about 100,000 miles on them. And there's the electrode and the ground electrode there. One that I don't like, what I previously tried out was the Denso Iridium twin tips, and that's not what this is, but it's close enough to give you an idea. See that little electrode there, and the whole idea is that the iridium will last longer and you can get away with a thinner electrode. They only lasted me about 60,000 miles, and then when that happens, that electrode just wears away, and then you have a giant gap and your engine starts performing poorly, and it also puts a strain on your ignition coil. So I went back to the Champions and I noticed a dramatic improvement immediately, and that's what I stick with from now on. So that's my choice. So let's get on to actual installation. Now let's discuss what you're going to need before you even start. Of course, you're going to need your new spark plugs. You're going to need your new wires if you're replacing them. You're going to need some anti-seize lubricant. You're going to need to have some dielectric grease. You're going to want to have a gauge for measuring the spark plug gap, and if you're not familiar, the gap is that space between the electrode and the ground probe. Though they come pre-gapped at 0.050 inches, or in millimeters it would be 1.3 millimeters, which is what it should be set at for a Grand Caravan. During shipping or whatever, a lot of times they get bent down, and 2 of these spark plugs were bent pretty far down, so you're always going to want to double check that. You're going to need a spark plug socket. Don't use a regular socket, and I'll tell you why. If you use a regular socket and you go to put this socket onto the spark plug and it's crooked and you go to turn it and you think you're seated, you will snap this thing in half. Down inside there, there's a little rubber grommet that cushions the ceramic part of the spark plug and also keeps it centered. So make sure you use, for the Grand Caravan, a 5/8 inch spark plug socket. Another good thing to have is a variety of lengths of ratchet extensions, because depending on which spark plug you're taking out, you're going to be using a different length or a combination thereof. Some other good things to have on hand would be engine degreaser, brake cleaner, one or the other or both, and if you have an air compressor, have a blower gun, preferably one with a wand style like this. And then of course you're going to need your ratchet set. Your normal mechanics tools, breaker bar is a good idea to have on hand, and I will cover those and that when we get to that. You know, I will be replacing the wires with some high energy wires, and if you still have the OEM wires, you'll notice there's a number on there. This cylinder 6, and up on the distributor coil there's a number that corresponds to it there, but you will not find a number anywhere on the engine. I prefer not to simply remove all the wires and remove all the plugs, do it like that. I just do them one at a time. That way you can be sure of no confusion. Now if your wires have been on here a while, you may have trouble getting them off of the spark plug. Less worry if you're replacing the wires for if you damage them, but what I do is I will try twisting them back and forth to free the boot up if it's fused to the spark plug. And the same thing can happen over here, though this is much easier to break free over here than down here at the spark plug. Now you always put the socket on the spark plug first. I've already broke that loose, that's why that's spinning. And then I'll put my extension on there and then the ratchet on top. Now you'll notice I put the shorter extension down here and the longer one up here, because just by dumb luck, if I put the longer one on the bottom, this meets up with this cross member here and kind of puts it on an angle, whereas this is a straight line. And experiment with what works for you. I mean, I could just as easily do it down there, have a little less room to spin, but that works fine. And now what you are going to do is you're only going to back the spark plug out halfway to 3/4 of the way. Okay, the spark plug is backed out 3/4 of the way. If it's a cold engine, then I will spray down around the base with some brake cleaner, and then I will follow it with the blower to blow everything out of there. If it's a warm engine, especially a hot engine, I would not use the brake cleaner. I would just blow it out with the air really good, get the nozzle down into that crevice and blow it all out. Also, if you want, you can use some engine cleaner a day or two before, which I actually did on this side here because this valve cover is starting to leak some oil, so it was all oily down there, and flushed all that out ahead of time. But now I'll spray it with the brake cleaner, and then I will blast it real well with the compressed air, and so that when I remove that spark plug, there's nothing that can fall down into the combustion chamber. Okay, here's my first spark plug that's out. I tried some other spark plugs, so I don't know if this has 80 or 100,000 miles on it, but I just checked the gap and it is still perfect. It's still at 0.050 inches. I mean, really, it tells you a lot about the longevity of this spark plug. Okay, here's my new plug. I stuck it into the socket first, and then I applied some anti-seize to the threads. Do not, I repeat, do not slop it up with anti-seize. This is probably a little more than I should or normally use, just because when I squeezed the tube, a lot came out. Scraped some of it off. But just enough to fill up the threads in a stripe on one side and the other side. The Champions make no mention of having a coating on the threads that prevent it from seizing up in the socket where you screw them into. Other brands like Denso, they say that they have a coating on them, so there's no need to use any anti-seize, at least the first time you screw them in. If you remove them and put them back in, then you definitely have to use anti-seize. But I always use anti-seize anyway, because you don't want to go removing a spark plug and find that you've taken those aluminum threads in the cylinder head along with it. So this will stop the spark plug from seizing up in the aluminum cylinder head. And you'll want to have the plug in the socket, preferably attached to an extension. So I'm going to do it with the camera at the same time. And insert it, and then hand thread it down. And there it's grabbed, it's threading down. And hand thread it all the way down until it bottoms out. Now, these spark plugs do not have a gasket down on the base. If it has a gasket down here, then you tighten the spark plug down until it stops turning, and then you tighten it an additional 1/4 turn. These ones that don't have the gasket, you simply you turn it until it stops moving, so it's right there, and then it's just 1/8 of a turn. And that is it. That is all you tighten them. Now the aftermarket wires will not have any notation onto them as far as what cylinder they go to. Now if you're interested, the OEM wires are 3 different lengths, with the longest being cylinder 2 and cylinder unmarked. The mediums ones being cylinder 3 and cylinder 4, and the shortest ones being 5 and 6, so 1 and 2 are the longest. The aftermarket wires that I got are 6 different lengths, and I found it was better to, out of the pairs, to go with the longer of the pairs in the front and the shorter in the back, but overall they're all longer than the OEM wires, but that's not really a big deal. The insulation on these are very good. There shouldn't be any arcing through the insulation. Now before you put your wires back on, you're going to take your dielectric grease. I cut the end off of a Q-tip and just, it might be a little too much, but smear it around on the inside of the boot, and also the boot on the other end. Move some of this out of here. And this grease serves 2 purposes. Number 1 is it will stop the boot from seizing to the spark plug, fusing to the spark plug, or fusing to the distributor. Number 2 is it'll stop dirt and moisture from getting into the boot and allowing the voltage to arc down the outside or inside of the boot, outside of the spark plug, and short out, arc down to ground down here, so therefore the spark never makes it to the tip of the spark plug. This is an important step. Don't neglect it. And then when you go to install your wires, make sure you seat it and then push it till you feel it, hear it click. And that is true for both ends of the wire. And if you have a wire tree, put it into the clip. Now the rear plugs are exactly the same, except for you will be doing a lot of it by feel. Now, if you look at the front distributor, the closest part goes to the farthest cylinder, the middle goes to the middle, farthest goes to the closest here. On the back, it does not run the same order, so don't go putting them in that same order. So this one goes to this cylinder, the middle one goes to the far cylinder, and then the far one on the distributor goes to the middle cylinder. And the best advice I can give you whenever working back here on these plugs is have your socket on an extension, and whether you are installing or removing, get that socket seated properly onto that plug first. And when you go to install, you want that plug in the socket. And what I'll typically do is I won't have the extension on there. I'll just grab, use my finger to hold, make sure I'm holding the new spark plug in place, reach down there with the socket, get it in place. If you notice, it's on a weird angle, or it's on an angle, and that can throw you off when you're trying to screw it in. Don't force anything, don't cross thread. It should always screw in nice and smooth. This particular extension may actually be a little too long. I will try a few different sizes, and I suggest you do the same. Find out what's comfortable for you. It's all finished now. It could be my imagination, but I think the engine sounds better. Before I do the final reassembly of the windshield wiper, etc., I will take it for a quick test drive just to make sure everything's a-okay before I throw everything back together. Then, as always, I will add a label to my air cleaner describing what I did, the date, and the mileage. Okay, well, I hope you found my video helpful. If you did, please like, share, and above all, subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.